I was avoiding doing this type of video. I swore that doing in-depth videos on new games would take a bit of a back burner, to try and limit rushing around and keeping on top of things. And then Arkane had to bring out a new game. Currently, they're still one of the few studios that is like one of those automatic purchases for me. Even if they are known for their poor PC releases, at least it's refundable these days within a couple of hours. For what it's worth, I had no issues with this game, but I am in the position that's kind of fortunate and have a decent PC. Arkane are a company known to be carrying the immersive sim barrier to some degree, a genre that waxes and wanes in popularity, but somehow survives on being popular with critics and game designers. But Deathloop is somehow different, whilst keeping some of that core of the genre. Deathloop is highly aware of the last 10 years of games, it knows what's been popular, it knows what it's good at, and it combines both to create something that's unique within the AAA space. So let's get into my critique of the game itself. This video is going to talk broadly about mechanical spoilers, and it may spoil you on some of the solutions in the game in a grand sense, but I'm going to try and keep it generalised where I can. You wake up on a beach. The cause of today's hangover is in front of you, the brown bottles of booze. Knowing that this is a time loop, waking up hungover every morning is literally my hell. As you stumble up, you quickly see this bold white writing that takes a form of direction and some narration on where you are. We are in a classic amnesiac story. You connect with Colt, the player character, as you both know nothing, but you do have this guidance. These initial few hours are heavily directed. Arkane does not want to leave you to get lost with what is going on. It makes sense as they're bringing across these repeating mechanics into a game space that is less used to them. So it wants to make its systems as accessible as possible using the narrative, pushing you through a set of experiences that it knows you will have, and even rewarding you for going off the path occasionally. The day is repeating. You die, you wake up at the start of the same day. You get to the end of the day, you wake up at the start of the same day. For some reason, someone called Juliana is hunting you, and you want to get out. You want to break the loop. You quickly learn two things. Putting knowledge forward is a solution to most of your problems straight away. Firstly, you need to kill 8 visionaries to break the loop, and then you also learn how to infuse things with residuum, the efflorescence that remains between the loops. This allows you to bring items between each loop. This process of learning takes a couple of cycles. It also introduces you to some of the important menus and how the world feeds into them. There is the lead screen where you can track various methods of taking down the visionaries as you develop them. There is the weapon lead screen where you can track your ability to get various weapons in the world. And then lastly there is the level information screen which shows you various hints you have for the 4 levels at each of the 4 times of day, which you can elaborate from and figure out that there are 16 total different level states you can go across. As you go around the world, all of these gain additional information. It's where you track what's going on. So when the game opens up, you can immediately see how exploration, the process of seeing an open window, sneaking in and reading everything you can, feeds into information into these menus, and that is your progression. Some leads are naturally more interesting than others. When I found out a group of Eternalists, the self-styled cult-like enemies of the game, were leaving a big present for me, I had to go and explore, even against my better instincts. It was a trap, of course, but then I learned if I was to go a time segment earlier, a little earlier in the day, I can disrupt them laying the trap and get the drop on them, gaining a brand new sniper rifle. But the rifle will disappear as soon as I die, right? My inkling early on was that I would have to learn weapon locations and consider that when plotting what will become my final route. But the game quickly rejects this with Residium. After completing a minor story point, we were able to infuse various items with this rainbow-like ethereal thing that allows them to travel between loops with us. In comparison to another game that's in a similar space, Hitman, at its height it asks you to find the elements of the puzzle, each of the individual pieces, each time you play, with you only able to bring a small amount of things with you. You learn the areas, become a master of them, grabbing the parts, perfectly avoiding guards to construct the ultimate death for your unaware foe. You outsmart them to a degree that's impossible, capturing the heights of a heist movie. That moment where everything comes together. The effect that Residium has on Deathloop is you are creating a loadout that you bring into each level instead of you having to find items along your way. So you're undertaking 2 tasks initially, gaining information and building this loadout. Maybe taking down a visionary or 2 along the way. Repetition. key to this loop is of interest to me in a critical regard. It's also something frequently part of Arkane's games and the immersive sim in general. The very nature of pick your own path through a level leaves a path unpicked, something you did not see, meaning whole aspects of the game are left unchecked. This could be the violent route through Dishonored. After you completely ghosted each level, you can miss out huge elements of the game. The swordplay in Dishonored is quite good, for instance, for all those stealth only players out there. Also, there are often mechanical rewards for sticking to only one playstyle. So along with quick load and quick save buttons being very accessible, you start a playthrough that strives for perfection and rejects the messy. Even though when things start to go wrong can sometimes be these games at the most interesting. But this is something that Deathloop rejects. Instead of having the quick save, quick reload, you have one playthrough. When you die you start again, there is no loading a save to get around that. And that means not only do you get to experiment, you have to. When things go wrong, there are consequences for your actions. When you get spotted, you don't just instantly reload. So what are we experimenting with? We have a set of slabs, the name for the item that gives you power in this world. If you have any experience with Arkane's previous titles, then they will seem very, very familiar. To the point where the new naming convention has caused me to actually chase after the wrong slab for a while. I just want to blink. Shift. You can also become super strong with Havoc, throw enemies with Kinesis, or Nexus enemies together. Killing one of them that's linked kills them all, that's Nexused. You get what I mean. Colt also comes pre-equipped with the Reprise slab. You can die twice for free in each level, with the third life being your last and you starting the loop again. Which I think is really important for the balance of the game because it means that each death isn't super punishing. Apart from the abilities, you have a toolkit that includes weapons, trinkets and tools. Weapons are weapons. Trinkets are an upgrade system for yourself and your weapons, and are kind of similar to bone charms from Dishonored. It's a system that allows you to flavour different aspects of Colt. For instance, stealth crouching a lot quicker, or double jumping. And then the tools allow you to hack things, grenades that you have a set amount of, and these grenades are kind of multi-use. You can use them to lay traps or throw them as explosives. Before Residium, weapons appear a lot more disposable, which is in contrast to other games where a singular weapon lasts you much longer. You go through 2 whole Dishonored games with the same sword. But this means you kind of have this heightened experimentation. I often find myself examining the floor after a fight to see what I could take away. And this is especially true because there's different levels of rarity with different weapons. But instead of it spinning off into a massive loot grind, there are a set level of bonuses that can be added to the weapons, including the ability to add more trinkets, the ability to not jam as much, and one-off abilities such as a pistol being silent. It means it's always worth looking for new and interesting things, but they're not incremental. You can still take the first weapon that you get and headshot someone and kill them. It's just the other bonuses that you get with the weapon that make it worthwhile and an increased loot rarity. They also just feel good. The silent pistol is great with some upgrades to make it effective at a distance. The shotgun can really clean up, especially when you lower the recoil or increase the reload rate. Plus the reload animation on it is dumb and great. The weapons remain interesting, and if we are comparing them against Arkane games, the best they've been, I would say. I think the element of being forced away from quick load and quick save also plays a part here. The shotgun becomes much more useful when things go wrong, so I'm much more likely to be carrying one of those in my back pocket instead of disposing it for stealth only weapons. You want to take in a toolkit that is varied and allow you to approach different situations because you're going to be facing different situations. It's not always going to be you in charge. So in Deathloop, each problem has a solution. Whether it's the problem of Juliana invasions, which I will get into in a minute, or the problem of a particular visionary, the problem of stealth or clearing out large amounts of enemies. At its best, these solutions are player directed. You are building this toolkit that you choose how you want to expand, with the weapons and slabs. As you play further, you will get different preferences. But this isn't just getting more powerful weapons, you have seen more of what the game has to offer, you've seen more breadth of the challenges that you'll have to face. For instance, I personally always want a stealth weapon. I do still want to engage in stealth up to the point where I've dropped out of it, so the ability to do that was important. The movement of shift as well, the blink-like ability is just so important for how this game feels to me. So these are my must-haves. but they're not required. I could take any of these abilities in and get a different play experience. But the solutions to these problems at worst feel very directed. This is where the mechanical spoiler comes in. You quickly figure out that if you just follow the lead board for the visionaries, you're going to get the solution to the game. There are very few moments in this game where I find a clue and then I piece that together with another bit of information to get a solution. Instead I just get an update to my objectives where I can just click it and then follow it straight to it. But so often at getting one of these clues, the game just points you where you need to go. It ends up giving you the sense that you're unable to stumble into solutions, instead of the game telling them to you, the game needing you to know them. It forces you into knowledge instead of letting you discover it. And both of these are antithetical to some other games that were in a similar sort of space, the previously mentioned Hitman and Outer Wilds, another game that uses knowledge as progression. So Hitman's approach here offers some sort of a mid-ground. It gives you pointers at solutions, but then encourages further experimentation. Especially with the levels being short and there being rewards for repeating the levels, it means that you want to try and take out the enemies in different ways. And if you take out the enemies in all the ways possible, you get more rewards for it. So it's incentivized for you to explore different ways of taking out the enemies that aren't just the story-led missions. Outer Wilds represents the other side of this. It tracks information for you to discover, which then feeds back into solving the world. Yes, the world is kind of a puzzle. Yes, you have a board of information of what you know currently, which is really important for you to ground yourself and center yourself of where you want to explore next, but it never directly tells you the solutions to the problems. It just gives you a decent idea of where you will want to go next to find another set of information. This obviously has a pitfall of being less directed, which means people have more chance of being stuck, but there are outside sources of information as well that exist. You know, the internet is there for you to look up things if you have to. But broadly, I think if you are having that as a component of your game, it's probably failed to some degree if it comes to having to look at the internet for a solution to a problem. So this for me is where Deathloop stumbles. But then the moment-to-moment decisions about how you progress through a level are great. These are the decisions that are yours. It's your own player agency. You know, do I want to approach a particular visionary from the roof, or by sneaking in their party? There is still a breadth of choice here. So these two elements in contrast I find kind of stunning actually, because one really acknowledges your player direction for so much of the game, but then there is this rejection when it comes to your core objectives. It's telling you what to do. This is especially true. It's especially true because they've developed these systems and built these systems, but you could choose whether to opt in or opt out from the beginning of the game. And I think that would, again, make it a player choice of how you want to experience these things. And you could even have it where you turned it on later on in the game, being like, okay, I'm stuck now, you know, I do want to find out how to move forward. You could make that choice to turn it on. Up to this stage, I don't think we've really talked about people actually situated within the loop. Again, Arkane have done an incredible job of building a place, somewhere that has a history, and you can see people having built it. But at no stage do you get much of an idea of the people who actually inhabit it. There is a tension here, with the enemies seeming so much larger than life, but the place being so grounded in this weird history, and it seems a bit at odds. Yes, it is fun to take down the young billionaire Alexis, because he's just such an oversized, detestable caricature of a person. But I don't really have a decent idea of who he is, or if I do, it's such a built-up person that there is no real humanity to him. Which is all fine. You know, it's good to have your targets be something that's enjoyable to take out to some degree, but then when you compare this to your relationship that develops with Juliana, it's just so at odds with each other. Even if she is a villain to some degree, the verbal cat and mouse games that folded over the physical cat and mouse games with the invasions just develops the actual responses between these two characters to such a degree that their relationship and her character itself remains highly interesting throughout the game. The world building does allow for other lanes of thought though. What does it mean to live forever in a world that's stopped in one place? Does the world exist outside of this loop? How much free will can you express if you are trapped in the same day and you take the same actions time and time again with predictable responses to cult's changes to your routine? I mean, this is always the curse of video game characters. They are always going to be stuck on routines, at least until we develop some super level of AI. But even then that might be rough to play against as a player. You want them to be predictable so that you can mess with them. But when so many of these elements are represented mechanically, it's interesting that they're not particularly explored narratively. It touches on it at moments, but it leaves the consequences of the loop and the people within it kind of alone. One last thing I'd like to broadly talk about is the inclusion of a multiplayer mode. At first this could seem odd, even having been primed for this sort of experience with Dark Souls. In each level with a visionary, there is a chance that you're invaded by Juliana, played by the computer in offline mode and played by a person if you're online. I played most of the game in an online mode, only switching it off towards the end to finish out the story uninterrupted. An option that I think is very important actually to get the game done, but I wish there was a mode of switching it off actually in narrative as well, instead of just clicking the online-offline switch. The moment of invasion is one that is full of tension, especially when you've experienced enough of them. You get a snippy line from Juliana and your exit tunnel is blocked. She is on the hunt. In offline the battle is straightforward, at least in contrast to the online version. You can just shoot her in the face and she dies. In online she becomes one of those enemies that I find highly fascinating in any game. It's a mirror of yourself, a reflection of what you can do. She has the access to the same abilities and weapons you do, and is played by another person. She's a shadow of you. Smartly it's balanced in your favour as Colt. You need to die 3 times in each level to Juliana's 1, but it still becomes a sparring match that rewards game knowledge. How well you know a level, if I know there's a piece of high ground, a location of some health, or even knowledge of which slabs each party is using, it becomes essential if you want to try and create a battle plan and take down the other party. All of this is additive to the fact that it actually takes place in the levels you're playing, so you can start manipulating the face of the field in your favour. If I got an invasion as Colt, I would immediately take down as many enemies silently around me to clear out some breathing room to actually have a battleground against Juliana where the Eternalists weren't going to interrupt the fight, which negates one of her advantages. It also works because it changes the face of the game, it changes your position within the game. You're no longer the king of your location, there is a competitor. And it also fits the story really well, the narrative implications of this are great. Also, it's a great way for Colt to grab some upgrades to his toolkit for free earlier on in the game. I do think it's always important with these things to point out that this is going to be a shame as a historical object, because you're never going to get the likelihood of playing this months down the line. Dark Souls at least remains popular enough where there's going to be some people playing online, whereas I do feel like this is a sort of game that playing an online Juliana is just not going to be feasible 5-10 years down the line. Again, in writing this, I've had this weird experience where cataloguing my thoughts has made me come out more negative than I anticipated. Playing this game is great. I just love loop mechanics in games a lot, and it leads me to be quite critical of them. And I definitely think this is an instance of being harder on the things I like, because Deathloop is really good and really interesting. It just doesn't manage to tie together some of the components that work here for me. So much of what is gained ends up being lost with the game being so heavily directed, especially when player direction is rewarded in so many other ways. It also stings a bit in a world where you can see all of this direction being opt-in. I think of the subtle rewards for playing Outer Wilds, how the moments of puzzling through the game get you so much, you really truly feel like you're building an understanding of the world, and how Deathloop just feels like a guided on-rails experience. I think it is probably important to differentiate from meta objectives and moment-to-moment gameplay in regards to this sort of agency. When I'm exploring maps and choosing how to go through them, the game still heavily rewards it in a very immersive sim-like way. But the moment of closing in on these big objectives and choosing how to do that is just so directed and guided that I think it's at odds with another core of this game. This also comes with what I think is probably the biggest and most important change to this game, and that's not having the saves and reloads. Going through in stealth only to mess up, have your well-made plans been thrown out, and having an absolute horde of enemies quickly collapse on your last known location doesn't lead to a quick load. You have to live with your actions, you have to be messy, you have to figure out how to solve this problem. And after all, tomorrow might be more cleaner when we wake up the next day in the loop. I might have a better idea how to approach certain sections and complete it in a cleaner fashion. But that's only for the failures that happened previously. And this is why the game as a player experience does work. This is a great component to the game. Deathloop feels like an important step. It will hopefully be a game referenced when talking about design for the next 20 years, or at least an important stepping stone on this conversation, but I do think it misses the end goal. I hope Arkane do a Deathloop too. This is a space that's so rich to be mined still. I think there is a chance of very important consequences for this game, but only time will tell. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully I can avoid doing too many more in-depth critique videos, but I quite enjoy doing them anyway, so we'll see. It feels like a rush when you're playing a new game. You want to get it up and out there, and I'm still, like 10, 11 days in from Deathloop being released? That's by the by anyway. My name's been Billy. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.